Google Daydream did not vanish because Google forgot to make a headset. It vanished because the original promise was almost too convenient. Take the Android phone already in your pocket, slide it into a soft fabric viewer, and suddenly that same phone is a VR screen, a game console, a sensor rig, and the center of a new platform. In 2016, that sounded like the shortcut VR needed. Google had Android N, Pixel, and Pixel XL as the first Daydream-ready phones, a dedicated controller, and a pitch for high-quality mobile VR. Then the ending became brutally plain. Google's own Daydream help page now says the software is no longer supported, gets no more software or security updates, may not work properly on Android 11 or later, and Daydream View is no longer sold. So the question is not why did a cheap accessory fade out? The question is sharper, how did a platform backed by Android, Google apps, phone makers, and media partners disappear in about 3 years? The answer starts with the part that made Daydream look brilliant. It used your phone. And that was the trap. Before Daydream, phone VR had a reputation problem. It felt like a clever demo, put a phone into a viewer, look around, smile for a minute, then put the phone back in your hand. Daydream was Google's attempt to move beyond that. Announced at I/O 2016 as part of Android N, it was not just a shell for a phone, it was a platform with Daydream-ready phones, Daydream viewers, a small motion controller, software changes inside Android, and requirements for the phone hardware itself. That last part matters. Google was not saying every Android phone could suddenly become good VR. It was saying certain phones, built with the right displays, processors, and sensors, could offer a more comfortable shared experience. That made the idea feel serious. Cardboard had been open and playful, Daydream was selective and polished. If it worked, Android could do for VR what Android had already done for smartphones, and it give many manufacturers a common target and give developers one big market to build for. That is why Daydream's failure is more interesting than another dead gadget. It was a test of whether the phone ecosystem could become the VR ecosystem. The bet looked rational because the pieces were already lying on the table. People were buying powerful phones, Android had hardware partners, Google had YouTube, Street View, Play, and a way to push platform features through the operating system. Daydream View also entered at a price that made the hardware feel approachable. Google announced a $79 US price and a November 10, 2016 store launch. Pixel and Pixel XL were the first Daydream-ready phones, but the ambition was bigger than Pixel. Google had announced hardware partners and expected more compatible phones to arrive, turning Daydream from one headset into a category. That is the version of the story that probably made sense inside the launch meeting. You do not need to convince people to buy a full VR computer first. You sell a lighter viewer, certify premium phones, and let Android scale do the heavy lifting. It was a very Google-shaped answer. Make the platform, invite the ecosystem, and let developers chase the installed base. But Daydream needed two things at the same time. It needed strict quality control so VR would not feel awful, and it needed broad Android scale so the market would feel worth serving. Here's where the success condition starts to turn against Google. A phone is a miracle device, but VR asks rude questions. Can the display refresh quickly enough? Can the sensors track motion with low enough delay? Can the processor keep rendering without overheating? Can the battery survive a session? Can the user ignore the fact that the device strapped to their face is also the device they use for messages, maps, photos, calls, and everything else? Android Nougat's VR mode is the clue that ordinary phone behavior was not enough. Daydream needed low latency and sustained performance changes, plus sensor and rendering optimizations to make phone VR more viable. The little controller solved one visible problem: you could point, select, and play without tapping the side of your face. But the controller could not solve the deeper bargain. The phone still had to be the display, the computer, the sensor hub, the power source, and the daily phone. Daydream's elegance came from asking one object to do every job. Its weakness came from the same request. The more serious the VR experience became, the more the phone had to stop behaving like an ordinary phone. It would be too easy to say Daydream died because there was nothing to do in it. Google did not launch it that way. The pitch included personal cinema, games, travel, and familiar Google services. Google's launch material pointed to YouTube VR and Street View. It also named major entertainment and media partners, including Hulu, Netflix, HBO, the New York Times, Ubisoft, and Electronic Arts. That matters because Daydream was trying to skip the loneliest phase of a new platform. A viewer could imagine watching video, exploring places, playing games, and using recognizable apps from day one. But content is not a magic spell. Developers and media partners build for audiences they can reach. Audiences buy into platforms that feel alive. Those two sides have to meet in the middle. Daydream had recognizable names on the shelf, but every app still depended on the size and activity of the Daydream-ready user base. If the compatible phone pool was narrow, the headset stayed a side feature. If usage was casual, the app shelf could look impressive without becoming a habit. This was the second trap: the ecosystem needed scale before it could prove it deserved scale. The first visible crack was compatibility. Android's strength was variety. Daydream needed control. Those goals do not naturally like each other. Daydream only worked on certain phones with specific components, and Google expected a limited list of compatible devices rather than the whole Android world. That was not a mistake in quality terms. Bad VR can make people uncomfortable fast, so Google needed a bar, but the business consequence was painful. Every requirement narrowed the addressable audience. A developer did not get Android. A developer got the subset of Android users with a Daydream-ready phone who also owned or would buy the viewer, who also wanted to spend time inside VR. That funnel is much thinner than the word Android makes it sound. The irony is that certification was supposed to protect the experience. It also made the platform feel fragmented before it had momentum. By 2019, the picture had become harsher. Google confirmed Pixel 4 would not support Daydream, and The Verge reported that no phones released that year supported the platform. The Android scale story had flipped. Instead of many phones pulling Daydream forward, the phone roadmap was leaving Daydream behind. The second crack was more human. The headset stole the phone. That sounds obvious, but it is the kind of obvious that kills repeat use. To enter Daydream, you placed your daily device inside the viewer. Now the thing you check constantly was sealed into the product. Your apps, messages, and normal phone behavior were no longer in your hand. In 2019, Google's explanation made this friction explicit. The company said adoption had disappointed, usage was declining, and one problem was that asking people to put the phone they use all day into a headset meant losing access to everyday apps during the session. That is not a tiny annoyance. It changes the emotional math. A dedicated game console can ask for your attention because that is its job. A phone is a communication object first. Daydream tried to borrow it for VR, but the loan had a cost every time. Casual products live or die on small frictions. If getting started feels like giving up your phone, the viewer becomes something you show a friend once, not something you reach for every night. And once the phone stopped being a convenience and started being a tax, standalone headsets had an opening. The market did not have to solve every VR problem to make Daydream look old. It only had to solve Daydream's central compromise: remove the phone from the slot. The most ironic step came from inside Google's own ecosystem. In 2018, Lenovo released Mirage Solo, the first standalone headset running the Daydream platform with WorldSense positional tracking and no phone required. That product did not turn Daydream into the winning standard, but it quietly admitted the direction of travel. A better VR session was less dependent on borrowing a phone. Then Oculus Quest made the contrast much louder. Launched on May 21, 2019, Quest was standalone and wireless, with 6 degrees of freedom tracking and no external PC or phone required. That was a different promise. Phone VR optimized entry used the device you already own. Standalone VR optimized the session, put on a device built for this one job. Once that category became credible, Daydream's middle position became awkward. It was more controlled than cardboard, but not as purpose-built as standalone. It needed premium hardware, but the premium hardware was still a phone with phone priorities. The center of gravity moved away from phone-based VR before Daydream could become a durable habit. The collapse became concrete in October 2019. Google's new Pixel 4 did not support Daydream, and Google confirmed Daydream View would no longer be sold. That was not just another Android manufacturer drifting away. Pixel had been the first Daydream-ready phone line. If Google's own flagship no longer carried the platform, the message was clear. The headset had lost its reason to remain part of the phone story. The explanation tied back to every crack we have already seen. Adoption had not reached the level Google hoped for, usage was declining, phone friction was real, and the compatible device pipeline was drying up. The official endpoint was even flatter. Daydream VR software is no longer supported. No more software updates, no more security updates. The app may not work properly on Android 11 or later. Daydream View is no longer sold. The strangest part is not that Google discontinued a headset, companies discontinue accessories all the time. The strange part is that Daydream was meant to be Android's VR layer, and it died when Android phones no longer had a reason to make room for it. The platform did not explode. It was quietly removed from the path forward. Daydream matters because it had so many pieces that people assume a platform needs. It had operating system integration, it had first-party phone support, it had a headset and controller, it had a store launch, a clear price, named media partners, and a promise that premium Android phones could become a shared VR base. If the simple version of platform strategy were enough, Daydream should have had a real shot. Its failure shows why phone-based VR was a narrower idea than it looked. The phone gave VR access, but access was not the same as commitment. The phone gave Google scale, but certification cut that scale down. The phone gave users a cheap way in, but it also made every session compete with the normal uses of the device. And while Daydream was trying to balance those compromises, standalone headsets were starting to make a cleaner offer. The viewer gets the lesson in the shape of the product itself. A phone and headset system is clever because it borrows a device people already own. It is fragile because it borrows a device people cannot stop needing for other things. Daydream was not merely a failed accessory, it was Android's lost attempt to make phone VR into a standard. The final retirement step came when Android 11 dropped Daydream support, turning the old platform into something outside the modern Android path. But the bigger lesson is not that Google was wrong to care about immersive computing. Google later returned with Android XR, announced with Samsung and Qualcomm, and framed around headsets and glasses rather than sliding a daily phone into a fabric viewer. That afterlife makes Daydream clearer. The dream was not ridiculous. The foundation was wrong for the job. VR needs comfortable sessions, reliable tracking, enough performance headroom, a developer surface worth building for, and a device that is not secretly trying to be your phone at the same time. Daydream tried to turn premium Android phones into that foundation. The result was elegant for a demo, plausible for a launch, and weak as a long-term platform. Hardware compromises narrowed what the experience could be. Fragmented support narrowed who could use it. Standalone headsets narrowed the reason to keep waiting. So when people ask why phone-based VR vanished, Daydream gives the cleanest answer. The phone was the shortcut into VR, but it was also the ceiling. Google put VR inside Android, then walked away when the phone became the problem.